You stand at the edge of the water, somewhere along the Danube, where night has settled in without hurry. The city behind you is dimmed. The last commuter trams wander into side streets, and only a few amber lamps rest on the slow, wide current. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy this. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air carries a faint scent of wet stone and old wood, the kind that clings to riverside quays after a day of sun and traffic. A low hum drifts from upstream, maybe a barge, maybe the city's last breath before sleep. You step aboard a small vessel, nothing formal, a humble cabin cruiser with one lantern that swings gently on a short pole. The motor finds itself and settles to a low, steady murmur. A coiled rope rests by your feet. The hull loosens from the dock, and you slide into the main flow, where the water is glassy and your first ripples widen, pale and calm, until they forget what started them. Ahead, a stone bridge appears, an arch from a century that is not this one. Underneath, a string of old bulbs glows and blinks, not in time, but in a way that feels honest. You pass beneath, and the sound changes. The motor's voice softens against the stone ribs, and then opens again to the open air. On the left bank, narrow houses lean a little toward the river. Their shutters are closed, their doors are dark, except for one upstairs window, where a single lamp burns as if that is its purpose. You can almost hear the river from that room. Perhaps the person there can name each kind of wake by sound alone. The current is with you. You let the boat keep the middle, and let the middle keep you. A bend to the right draws a faint, green clock face into view on a church spire. Hands show just past 11. A long, low island divides the flow. Only a strip of sand and a fringe of willow. Two swans move slowly into the reeds, white forms that glow and dim as the lantern sways. Where the water deepens, the motor drops half a note into something you can feel through the rail. Across the way, old warehouses have learned new uses. Some windows carry the soft blue of late-night screens. Others are black and patient. And a few hold warm, butter-yellow squares that look like conversations paused, without regret. A freight barge rests ahead, loaded with gravel, its deck simple and orderly. The mooring lines take small breaths. Water lifts and taps at the steel. Everything suggests a job that is paused, but not abandoned. The pilot's cabin is dark. Whoever brought it in knows this stretch well, and left the rest to the river. The banks widen. The city falls away. Low fields appear where the sky is broader and holds stars that the downtown lamps could not manage. The moon hangs low, a quiet crescent, and you see your own wake turn silver for a moment before it returns to gray. You think about the length of this river. It begins where the land does not yet admit to being big, and moves through names and borders until it remembers the sea. Tonight you are somewhere in the middle of that line, a small point moving along a soft, dark ribbon. The thought calms your breath. Nothing urgent waits here. Another bridge grows out of the dark. This one a modern span of steel and concrete that lifts a motorway over the water. A far, low rumble becomes less far for a few seconds, and then leaves again. Under the bridge the air is cooler. Your jacket finds its work. On the right bank, a sheltered harbor sits behind a breakwater of rough stone. A dozen pleasure boats rest there, fenders squeaking in a way that does not ask for attention. A small hut keeps a light on. A figure moves once behind the window and does not wave. You move on without asking for anything from them or from the river. The main channel straightens and a rail bridge crosses the banks. Iron trusses set against a sky that has gathered more stars. You hear the train before you see it, a distant clatter that collects itself from the landscape. A wash of light crosses the trusses and moves overhead, full for a moment, then folding back into the night. The air keeps a gentle vibration, and then it too loosens and drifts away. You pass under as the last car clears, and the quiet that follows feels deeper because of what was there a moment ago. Past the bridge, the banks grow wilder. Reeds take the margins, tall grasses sway in little sets like soft handwriting. A heron stands at the edge, still enough to be part of the bank. It turns its head slowly as you go by, and then steps once into the shallows, becoming reeds again. The boat keeps a straight wake. The wake writes a single line across the width and then edits itself until only glass remains. You let the river set the pace. The motor's pulse becomes a metronome for a slower part of the mind. Away from the city's haze, the sky is clear. The Big Dipper hangs high. Orion keeps a respectful distance above a low row of trees. Between them, smaller points make shapes that do not need names. The surface of the water collects and releases those lights, not by rules you know, but by rules the river knows. Your breath follows the hull's faint rhythm. Touch, release, touch, release, until the act of noticing becomes the act of resting. A low pier appears on the right, a short face of dark timbers with iron rings that have known every kind of rope. One square lantern burns on a pole. You feel the urge to read the grain of the wood, to trace the rings with your fingers. And then the pier slides into the past, no heavier than a sigh. Ahead, a long line of fog sits a hand's breadth above the shallows. It is not a wall, only a veil that turns the lantern to cream and makes the banks step back by a foot or two. You keep to the middle. A buoy leans a little and does not ring. The water is too gentle to ask it to. Where the fog thins, a narrow channel curls behind a long island. Logs lie at the upstream tip in a tidy, accidental harbor of their own. Floods arranged them with a kind of slow intelligence and left them to be admired by whoever keeps watch at night. You watch from a decent distance. The lantern finds them, then lets them go. The air tastes faintly of moss and of the iron that lives in wet stone. A small crossing shows itself by a line of lamps on the far bank. Perhaps a cable ferry works here when daylight returns. The ramps are empty now. The cables sleep below the surface. The road beyond the reeds is only a suggestion where the land turns soft and then straight again. A lone reflector catches your light and returns at once, satisfied with that small duty. The rest is patient dark. The river deepens. The motor answers with a lower thread in its voice. You keep the middle. Another bridge arrives, a narrower one that looks gray in the dark and will be green by morning. One lamp at midspan is out. The others stitch a dotted line in the mist. Your wake, newly sewn, turns those dots into a wavering ribbon that relaxes in a minute and forgets you. Under the bridge, the sound gathers and loosens like a breath you hold without meaning to. The right bank rises, just enough to lift a small chapel above the floodline. Its white walls glow faintly. The small cross is darker than the sky. No bell rings at this hour, but you can imagine its round, wooden note rolling across water and field, then finding hedges and barns, and resting there until morning. The idea of the bell is enough. Beyond this, the channel narrows, and soft water presses the hull in a way that asks for quiet hands. You make no extra demands. Reeds at the edge tap the surface with the careful confidence of things that have always done one job. A nightbird writes a single curve through the air and disappears into it again. On the left, old pilings stand in a pattern that once meant something to someone. Now they mark a long vanished dock and hold a small garden of river plants at their ankles. The sky changes in degrees that do not need names. A faint wind brings a scent from far fields. Cut straw, perhaps, or the tail end of a wood fire from a farmhouse that sleeps with its shutters barely closed. The lantern swings a little and calms. Your hands rest on a rail that has worn a smooth answer to years of hands like yours. The boat's middle knows the river's middle. The line between them holds you without asking anything in return. Ahead, dark shapes suggest a lock. No voices call, no numbers show. Only a house with a small lamp that glows politely, and a pair of gates with wet timbers that shine like lacquer. You ease toward the waiting pontoon and let the hull kiss rubber once. Water taps a soft rhythm. Ropes carry the message, and then rest. In the quiet, you notice the sound your breath makes when it leaves, and the sound the river makes when it receives it. A figure steps out of the house, bundled and unhurried, carrying a flashlight that colors the mist. A wave, a simple nod, the motion of a lever you cannot see, and the gates begin to open with a contented old groan. You slip inside between damp walls thick with moss. Drops of water fall from places that do not remember being dry. Scratches and initials map journeys that are now memories. Dates, names, marks of boats that had their own soft nights. The water rises. You cannot see the inches. You feel them. In the way the walls slide a little lower, and the lamp on the far side looks less like a reflection and more like a thing. The upper gates breathe outward and make a path. You ease forward into a reach that feels higher, quieter, set apart. The river stretches ahead with the patient confidence of something that has already decided to arrive. The motor keeps its low, companionable tone. The night lays out a ribbon for you and does not care how long you take to follow it. You pass a stretch where willows lean over the water, thin branches braided by years of wind. Each branch writes a narrow whisper on the surface and then takes it back. The lantern brushes the bark, and the bark answers with a quiet shine. Somewhere, a late train moves along a distant bank, too far to speak in anything but a line of tiny lights. A dog answers from a farmyard, and then loses interest. The world edits itself down to river and air. A small quay appears without a town. Old timbers, iron rings, a single pole with a square lantern that has had the same job for longer than you have had yours. You give it space, not from need, but from respect. In a minute, it is behind you, and the water has already forgiven the wake. You can taste a hint of cold on the night now. Not sharp, only the kind that makes the inside of your jacket a good idea. Names drift through your mind and do not insist. Passau, Linz, Vienna, Bratislava. They arrive the way buoys do, one at a time, doing the small, permanent work they were given, then letting you go as you pass. You keep the center. The current keeps the promise. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. The journey knows the way. When you wake, the river will still be a patient dark ribbon, and we will still be somewhere in the middle, moving without haste toward the place where water remembers the sea. The reach ahead feels wider, as if the river has taken a longer breath. Low trees lean in with the patience of things that have watched water all their lives. The lantern throws a small circle and does not argue with the dark beyond it. You keep the middle without thinking about it. The boat knows the habit, and the river approves. The whole touches fine ripples that settle as soon as they are made, and your mind follows their example. On the right, a meadow begins where the bank steps down. In the lantern's swing, you catch the white faces of posts that mark a path across the grass. By day, it must lead to a gate or a little ferry landing. Tonight, it leads only to quiet. Somewhere in the meadow, a cow turns in sleep, and the bell at its neck makes one slow, round sound that seems older than the farm itself. You listen because the night makes it easy to do so. The water here carries a scent of earth after rain, though rain has not visited in hours. Between the scents, you can taste a cool line of metal that belongs to old piles and rings. Every few minutes, a soft pop answers under the hole when a small bubble rises from black mud and meets the surface. The noise is not a surprise. It is what the bottom has decided to say, and the river lets it be said. Nothing urgent waits here. Far off and low, lights form a thin braid. They belong to a barge moving with the current and taking no interest in speed. It rides deeper than it looks, and the black above the water is only a fraction of its bulk. You do not need to pass it. You are both going where the river goes. You watch the way its stern light lifts and dips, and you notice how your breath does the same until the habit is shared, and you are both in your separate ways traveling well. On the left, a half-drowned breakwater steps out a few stones into the stream, then thinks better of it and lies down. Willows colonize what the stone could not finish, thin branches writing a delicate ledger over water that will never be balanced. Birds sleep in the lower boughs and do not trouble you with even a whisper of wing. The lantern respects their decision and barely touches the leaves. You feel the boat's weight over the channel, and you know, without knowing how you know, that the deep water is a finger's width to starboard. You shift nothing. The river has it. A bit of mist trails the surface again, gathered by nothing you can name. The beam of the lantern turns it to pale cloth, then lets it go. You think of cloth for a while, sheets cooling in a dark room, curtains moving when someone opens a window, a coat hung on the back of a chair. That is all tonight asks of you. Small thoughts that know when to stop. The boat keeps a simple tally. One wake, one echo, one breath. A narrow bay opens where an old quarry met the river and decided to be a harbor instead. Its face is a quiet wall, striped with years and rain. Iron rings are set into stone, at a height that tells stories about floods. Years when the river climbed, years when it did not bother. The water inside is a shade darker. A depth sounder would have something to say, but you do not ask it to speak. A square, stubborn lantern burns on a stubby pole. A second lantern farther back has gone to sleep early and wants no mention. You return to the thread of the main flow and listen as it gathers. Subtle changes carry a kind of grammar. The softening on the approach to a bend, the firming at the throat of a narrower run, the way loose chop gets combed into order between the knees of a bridge. You steer by that grammar more than by sight. Names do not insist. If they come, they do so gently. Fields, islands, villages that will still be there when morning lays a paler ribbon along their edges. Ahead, a low margin of woodland pulls away and leaves the river room to spread. You sense the shallow shoulders where new sand has found a place to rest. The channel turns a little, and a dark wedge rises out of the far bank. A piece of hill shouldering into the flat with old stone on its crown. The stone is not loud. It only reminds you that high ground has always been watched, and that watchfulness, like the river, is older than the names for it. You let the lantern brush the hill and then move on. A signal bell sits on a slender post near a bend that might invite mischief in fog. Tonight, there is no need for it to speak. The river wears its own caution well. A minor current from a side channel joins you here, and the surface tastes different for a few minutes, in a way you could not explain to someone who has not paid attention this long. You make a note to explain it to no one. The sky has thinned a little, and more stars remember that they were promised. The Big Dipper tilts, doing its work for travelers who need it. You are not one of them tonight, but the tilt comforts you anyway. A meteor signs its name briefly in a small handwriting that no one will read twice. The river does not pause to applaud. It has seen better signatures. Another barge lies against an industrial face where conveyors reach toward it like careful insects. Nothing moves. The belt sleeps in a gentle sag. The platens hold dust the way pillows hold dreams. A string of lamps along the yard's fence has a rhythm only if you are looking for one. You are not. You are learning to let the night choose its own tempo. You pass a field of pilings that once guided barges into order. The pilings now hold water plants in soft green collars and support committees of ducks that have agreed to be quiet. A fox crosses a gravel ramp and leaves nothing but a thought about a fox. Wind runs a slower hand over the grass and then forgets that too. These are the kinds of minutes that add up to a river's way of being. The channel bends toward a small town that tries not to wake. The placed lamps are few and polite, one at a ferry slip, one at a corner by a tree that has outlived every plan people made for it, one outside a bakery that must start its day before anyone else. You breathe in and get flour and wood smoke in a ratio that pleases the part of you that has liked bread since there was bread. A sign on the quay is there to be read in morning. Tonight, it reads as a rectangle and keeps its secrets. You let the boat float a little and listen. The motor keeps its low, companionable tone, but for a minute, you let it be a memory while the current does the visible work. The wake fades into a flat strip of water where stars have room to sit without being broken. Your shoulders lower the way a bridge lowers when the last truck leaves it alone. You think, here is the middle. Here is the quiet. Here is the promise kept without ceremony. Past the town, the bank shows scars of floods that asked questions and were answered. Fresh sand knits the base of a slope. Willows stitch the seam. The river smooths the newness with the patience of something that owns all the time it needs. On the inside of the next bend, a bar of gravel cresting the surface draws arrowheads of small waves. You give it space, not because you must, but because it seems right to do so. The lantern shows the stone's wet backs for a second and moves on. A railway returns, not to make a point, but to keep you company at a respectful distance. At one cutting, the slope exposes pale rock that holds the night like a cold shoulder holds a shawl. A maintenance shed keeps 2 square windows lit without explaining why. A signal changes somewhere far enough away that only the color remembers to travel. The train, when it finally comes, chooses to be modest. A few evenly spaced carriage lights, passing like a hand over a piano, where all the notes are soft. The river collects islands for a while, laying them like quiet punctuation marks along the sentence of its bed. You pick a path between two, not because it is clever, but because it is the one the water already wrote. The left-hand island hosts a low forest of saplings that the floods have agreed to keep. The right-hand island is a brush of reeds and a spit of sand, where footprints begin as soon as they are made, and end as if they were never there. Between them, your bow divides a very small opinion, and then brings it together again. A white rectangle on the right bank resolves into the facade of a riverside storehouse whose purpose has gone to other places. Its doors are closed in the thoughtful way empty buildings often adopt. Ivy writes a careful script across the upper brick. A cat sits on the sill, where heat must collect by day. Now it is simply the correct height to consider a river from. The cat does not see you, or sees you, and finds you a kind of furniture. Both options are fine. Wind fusses for a minute, and then gets over itself. In that minute, the lantern's flame stoops and rises. Reed tops feather themselves into a single gesture. Your jacket acknowledges its buttonholes. You feel the hull answer the small chop with the assurance of something that remembers larger waters. The confidence is not loud. The confidence only keeps you from making a plan. At a bend that opens to a wide left-hand view, you find two beacons, a red on one side, a green on the other, posed in a way that suggests a passage someone thought to name. You go between without announcing yourself, and receive no comment for doing it. Behind the beacons, the bank carries a fringe of poplars that tremble in groups like audiences do when the doors first open, and a hall greets them with its cool. The river performs without a stage. A final low fog of the hour clings to a line of shallows where a minor river comes in from the right. You sense the cooler touch as the waters speak briefly in two voices. Then they remember a common grammar and sing with one throat. The place where they became the same is not marked, except that you know it was nearby. You decide that knowing is not necessary, and let the decision pass. On a small promontory, a chapel and a square of stone wall hold a high, quiet shape against the stars. You make no story of it. It is enough that someone put work here long ago, and that work still stands and looks out, the way old things do when they understand time differently. The lantern does not climb that far. It is happier close to the surface where the river keeps its promises in a language of light and small movement. You take a longer line down the next run, letting the boat angle into a piece of water that looks as if it prefers you. The sound under the bridge you do not yet see begins before the bridge explains itself. There it is then, a low span whose supports wear weed like long coats. Lamps on the rail deck stand at a practical height and appear to consider one another. You pass under with your own small thought and come out again, feeling that something unimportant has gone well. Fields at the right begin to rise into outlines that will be hills in daylight. Vines take the lower rows in neat steps that look like careful handwriting. Higher up, the land becomes a dark assertion of shape against the sky. A lane cuts diagonally and declares a possibility of travel that you do not need to take. The river chooses your road, which is not a road. And you are grateful for the way decisions make themselves when the water is in charge. A quay appears with a cluster of silent cranes that have forgotten their rest positions and adopted the pose of storks. One small yard lamp glares more than the others, as if it had an argument earlier and is still thinking of replies. You smile, without showing your teeth, to the night, and then you stop smiling, because the night accepts either. Your wake folds against the quay and returns in a softer edition of itself. The cranes do not notice, which is their right. A bell somewhere upriver rings once. It isn't a clock. It is metal telling metal what time a particular chain came to rest, and then the matter is closed. The echo goes about its business in the dark and is done. You take that as a model for how to carry each minute. Do the work of it. Make the small sound that belongs to it. Then let it join whatever larger quiet collects such things for later use. The boat's small tasks proceed without instruction. The motor holds its low thread. The lamp keeps its witness. The hull wears the water well, and the water wears the hull like jewelry worn in the dark for the pleasure of knowing it is there. Your hands rest, not because there is nothing to do, but because the doing has learned you. The river remembers the sea. You remember sleep. Ahead, A bend stows a few folded lights that might belong to a town preparing to be morning in some hours. Between here and there are only the middle, and the middle again, and the line your wake draws and erases as if to say that moving and arriving can be the same thing if you let them. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. The current keeps its promise. When you wake, the lamps will have moved their tiny distances and the banks will have traded one curve for another. And we will still be following the simplest path a river knows.
The river keeps a patient center and you keep to it, letting the banks speak in a low voice. From time to time, the lantern sweeps a little farther than you expect and finds something simple. A post, a fold of bank, the wet sheen on a rock, and then returns to its small circle as if reminded that modesty suits it. On the right, fields begin to climb in terraces that the day would name vineyards. At night, you only see the calm geometry of rows stepping up the slope, a fine handwriting that keeps its balance even in the dark. The wooden stakes hold the lines like careful fingers. Wires hum faintly when the breeze has business. Somewhere higher, a house sits back from the edge with two windows half closed against the cool. They make a warm pair of eyes, and then look down again, satisfied that the river is where it should be. The current thickens and thins in a rhythm you can feel in your hands more than hear with your ears. The motor answers each change with a small adjustment of tone, content to be a companion instead of a leader. You make nothing dramatic of the steering. Your wrists do what wrists do when they trust the water. In the hush between little decisions, you notice how the stars arrange themselves along the surface and break apart on your wake, how reflections remember to return to themselves once the boat has passed. A promontory slides out of the left bank and makes the river consider its line. On the high point, a square of stone holds its place. By day, it might be an old watchtower. By night, it is only a steady shoulder against the sky. A dark grove of trees gathers around its base. The lantern brushes the lower trunks and spreads a soft varnish over the bark. Farther up the slope, a path climbs in slow switchbacks. You do not count them. Counting would be the kind of work you did in the day. The night asks for noticing and then letting go. Toward midstream, a pair of channel markers keep their posts, green on the right, red on the left. The river signs its sentence with familiar punctuation. Neither lamp is bright. Both are sure. When the mist hangs low, you see the color before you see the post. And when the mist thins, the posts become plain things again, with metal caps and wet paint, and a little halo of gnats that keep their own counsel. You pass between, reading without sounding out the words. A village leans toward the water, trying not to wake itself. The quay is short and tidy. A single bench sits under a plane tree, with a trunk so big the bench looks like an afterthought. Someone has left a bicycle against the rail, with a chain on only one wheel, as if to say, "Please stay where you are until morning, and then do as you like." The bakery at the far corner keeps a low yellow square in the door, and a warmer square in the back. A mixer will turn soon. For now, the smell of yesterday's flour and wood smoke meets the river halfway and rests there. Below the village, a ferry slip draws a soft V into the bank. The cable hangs slack. The little barge that carries cars from one quiet to another rests against its posts.
paint scuffed to an honest dullness where work is done most. The board that lists hours has nothing to say to night. A gull perched on the roofline lifts and resettles without moving anything but air, as if rehearsing a note it has already decided not to sing. You move past without asking for a crossing. The river is the crossing. Far ahead, lamps climb a hill in a neat diagonal. Some are streetlights, some are windows, and one is a bright clock face that holds a measured calm. You imagine the bell that belongs to it and decide that if it strikes, the sound will be kind to the hour. The hill's lower skirts hold sheds and small courtyards. A cart is left in a gate mouth. A coil of hose lies like a sleeping blue snake. A bucket catches a pale pane of lantern light and returns it to you. You give the return back and keep going. A line of pilings stands out into the current to meet a barge that is not there. On their tops, short triangles of metal point up current like little hats with opinions. Water takes the pilings in the slow, patient way it takes everything. Tap, slide, fold. Tap, slide, fold. You hear the taps as a mild metronome, and the folds as a hush that likes the word hush for what it says and for how it says it. The boat's rhythm joins the sequence and then forgets it on purpose. Past a bend, the channel deepens and widens. The motor slides down into a note that hums in your ribs. You lean a shoulder against the rail and let it hum there. Bone to wood, wood to metal, metal to water. Until the lines blur and the difference isn't necessary. On the left bank, tall white poplars stand where wind can find them. Their leaves flash back and forth in groups, showing silver, then dark, as if the trees are brushing the night's hair, and the night is pleased to let them. A low bridge arrives, with a shallow arch and a careful arrangement of lamps. The paint on the rail looks colorless in the dark. By morning, it will choose a name. Weed sways along the upstream faces of the piers like coats on pegs. Under the arch, sound gathers the way conversation thickens in a small room, and then thins again when the door is open. You pass through with that small, good feeling of being counted and then released. Behind you, the arch returns to being part of a town's idea of itself. The right bank carries a run of gardens whose fences are short enough to be friendly. Kitchen lights are out. Porch lights are out. A single motion sensor wakes itself and then, finding no motion worth the effort, goes back to sleep. An old boat is hauled up on a patch of boards, its keel wearing a polished groove that says, "This is an old habit." The boat's name, half flaked paint, half memory, still fits it. And the river holds the name a moment, then sets it down on the grass as if to rest. A second village is less tidy and just as kind. A low wall along the water holds a patch of ivy that has learned the shape of the stones beneath it, the way a palm learns the shape of a tool. A cat crosses the wall with the exact step of a creature that knows how high the next stone is without looking. It stops and faces the river. You do the same for a breath, because it is a good idea and requires nothing. At midstream, the current writes a shallow S over a bar you can feel but not see. The helm asks for almost nothing. You give it almost nothing, and are thanked for your restraint. A buoy with a small scar on its side leans into the flow exactly as much as it needs to. The scar is the kind a river gives in the course of doing business. You carry a few of those too, and the river has never asked you to explain how you got them. You think of names in a soft voice. Tolan, Krems, Milk, not to tick boxes or declare a route, only to let the river's longer sentence place commas where they feel right. Your lantern names nothing. It prefers verbs: glinting, breathing, folding, fading. A night bird stitches a single black thread across the sky and pulls it through. Somewhere, a dog runs to the edge of a yard and remembers that fences are where plans go to rest. It returns to the warm patch it left. Simple arrangements like that please the mind at this hour. Another lock announces itself, not with rules or calls, but with the shape of banks and the attitude of water that has decided to step up. Wet timbers shine. Iron gates keep their own counsel. A house nearby holds a small, polite lamp at the window. You ease toward the waiting face and let the hull touch the rubber in one soft syllable. From the house, a figure appears, coat zipped, hat pulled low, flashlight carried low as if not to wake the ground. A nod is enough. Mechanisms work without complaint. Gates fold back like a deep breath releasing. Water speaks in a level voice. The chamber lifts you as steady as a hand under the back of a sleeping child. Scratches and initials on the walls ride downward as if they are the ones moving. When the far gates open, the river in front is new only in height. It keeps the same old patience. The reach beyond the lock is narrower. The slopes come closer and ask the lantern to work a little harder. On the right, a cliff face shows layers like pages in a book, each with a way of catching light and giving it back. Small plants occupy clefts that ought to be too thin for roots. They make do, and look good doing it. A path at the base curves with the rock. A handrail of worn steel says someone thought to help and did. A bench stands where the view must be honest by day. By night, the bench is a good place for doing nothing very well. An old mill stream peels off on the left and idles through shadows. You hear the slow green talk water has when it pauses to become a pool. A wheel once turned somewhere farther in, turning grain into meal and energy into the simple bread that keeps towns quiet. The wheel is still now, or gone. The sound of it remains like a word on the tongue after the sentence ends. You do not reach in to fetch it. Leaving it in place is the better way to own it. The river bends again and gathers under an arch of trees. Branch tips touch above you in the way of hands finding each other in a dark theater, and the lane of water becomes a tunnel so gentle you could forget it has ends. The lantern shows leaves on the near side and invents leaves on the far side by implication. Insects dance where light is, and do not dance where light is not. The motor hums the same note it has been humming for long enough that the note is part of you, and you are part of the note. When the trees fall back, the stars return in their larger edition. The Big Dipper tilts a little more than last time you noticed. Orion has moved a finger's width to the west. The slow drift helps you measure the kind of time that matters here. Not clocks, but the time it takes a ripple to become a line, and then a memory. Not schedules, but the time it takes a fog to leave the water for the grass. A far bell makes a round sound that decides to be the last for a while. You approve. Ahead, a modest port makes its case with 3 cranes in a row and a concrete face with tire marks where barges have come to rest and moved on. The cranes look like birds that can sleep standing up. A long warehouse holds its breath,
A signal light at the corner turns from red to nothing, and then back to red, without insisting that anyone notice. You pass at a respectful distance. Your wake climbs the face and returns to you in a friendlier edition. You accept the return and keep it for a few seconds, and then let it go. The left bank drops to an orchard. The right rises to a dark shoulder with a terrace cut into it. A lantern on a post shows the terrace, and the terrace shows the lantern, and the whole transaction costs nothing. You taste apple, or perhaps you imagine apple, and the imagination is enough to bring the taste. A low fence stops where it meets a stand of reeds, because the fence understands when its job is done. A chair made of slats sits in a place that sunlight will find at noon. At night, the chair is a thought about someone who knows where to put a chair. From the far side of the reach, a line of windows opens one by one in a long, low building. A freight train has arrived and is being gentle about it. Doors slide, hands move. A voice speaks once for clarity, and then not again. You hear none of this directly. You read it in the windows, and the way light arrives on the apron and then squares itself and then leaves. The train departs with a small pride and a good idea of who it is. You return to the water's idea of who you are. A white cross on a dark roof marks a church, whose bell knows how to speak, but chooses not to. The roof line steps down to a small annex that holds a ledger of rain written in streaks. Those streaks will be read in daylight by no one and understood by everyone. You pass under their jurisdiction and are found acceptable without paperwork. Your breath steadies itself once more and stays that way, without needing to be asked. The banks widen, then pinch, then widen again. You notice that your noticing has become broader, like the river itself. Small things stand out and then blend back. The little lamp on the stern throws a gesture on the water, and the gesture becomes a sentence, and the sentence edits itself to a single word, and the word is a kind of yes. The current holds your line, the night holds the current. You hold the rail lightly, and the rail holds you back. At the far end of this reach, a cluster of town lights seems to float, not eager to declare themselves until you are close. Between here and there, the river draws one long breath and lets it out in a silver seam, and the seam keeps you honest about the middle. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. The boat knows how to keep its promise, and the river knows what promises are for. When you wake, the cranes will be behind you. The terraces will be stories told to the dark, and we will be where the channel asks us to be, still moving, still quiet, still on our way toward the place where water remembers the sea. The town's lights approach without hurrying, as if they prefer to be discovered rather than to announce themselves. First, a scatter of yellow windows on the lower bank, then a modest line of lamps along a quay, then a clock face that turns its pale circle toward the river, as if to greet a familiar companion. You stay a little off the wall, to let the reflections keep their long, unbroken strokes. A cat crosses a gangway, tail high, and pauses halfway to consider the water, which considers the cat back and keeps its secrets. The quay offers small proofs of ordinary life that are restful to notice. A hand cart sits under an iron ring in the stone, shadows folded neatly under its wheels. Coiled hose, a broom, the soft corner of a tarp. A ladder that belongs to a boat you will not see until morning. The bakery at the end of the street turns on one light in the back, and somewhere a mixer coughs a friendly cough and settles into its work. Flour and wood smoke meet the river and make a pleasant treaty. You borrow a breath of that treaty and return it improved. A short footbridge joins two banks like a sentence with a careful comma. Its deckboards keep the sound of footsteps to themselves. The lamps provide pools of permission rather than corridors of demand. You pass under, and the sound gathers for a moment, then loosens and returns to the open. On the right, a brief run of restaurants shows chairs stacked on tabletops, legs pointing upward like reeds. One kitchen window is open to the night. Someone washes 2 pans, then 3, then none. Water speaks the same language in every basin it finds. Past the last lamp, darkness resumes its comfortable majority, and the river widens to honor that. You aim for the center because the center knows what to do. The surface here has learned to forget ripples quickly. The wake writes its line and erases it in one continuous gesture. Your hands rest on the rail with the light knowledge that rails give. Not a demand to hold on, only an agreement to be near. A mild northerly attends to the poplars. The leaves practice their silver trick and return to dark. On the left, the land rises in terraces that the day would call vineyards. At night, they read as an ordered whisper on the slope, measure answering measure, season answering season. The posts stand with the posture of workers taking a respectful pause. Between 2 rows, a cart path climbs toward a shed with a window like a watchful eye. The window does not blink. The shed has nothing new to report, and that is the report. A barge comes down river with a patient dignity, lights trimmed to the business at hand. You yield a little more center than usual, because yielding is a generous way to travel. The barge moves past like a long thought that does not require words. Its stern light lifts and dips, lifts and dips, and you feel your breath honor that pattern until the pattern becomes yours and then falls away without objection. The river is full of patterns that do not mind being borrowed. A kilometer marker appears on the bank. A small white rectangle with black numbers that will mean more in daylight. Tonight, it is the right shape in the right place, and that is sufficient. You count nothing. The current keeps count, and the current prefers to be trusted. A willow leans so far over that its longest fingers sketch a faint script across your lantern's reflection, and then withdraw, as if shy about what was written. The smell changes before the view does. A brief bitterness, like wet iron and clean stone, comes forward to say there is a lock ahead. The banks narrow their shoulders. The water composes itself. A set of gates waits under lamps that have learned not to glare. You idle toward the waiting pontoon, and the whole speaks its soft syllable when it meets the bumper. From the keeper's house, a small lamp blooms, and a figure appears with the unstartled pace of someone who measures time in channels and levels. A simple nod. Levers move. Wood, iron, and water make the old contented noises they make when they do things together.
Inside the chamber, the night grows close in a friendly way. Moss breathes on the walls. A small trickle stitches itself down the stone and breaks into 100 tiny beads that catch and lose the lantern. Scratches and initials climb slowly as you rise, not in a hurry to get on with their narratives. You imagine the boats that made them, names half remembered, paint now lost, engines that once sang in these same frequencies. The top gates part like a thought completed. The boat slides forward into a reach that feels fresher by a few invisible inches. The current resumes its patient sentence. The next bend hosts a village that keeps its distance with courtesy. Gardens approach the water in terraces of thyme, beans, and practical flowers that do their work by day and sleep well by night. A bench faces the river at an angle that suggests someone has already learned the best way to listen here. Past the bench, a linden tree holds a sphere of quiet air under its branches. In summer, it would be a fragrance. Tonight, it is only a shape the night has time to keep. Farther along, a rail line returns and keeps you company without insisting. Signals stand at measured intervals, colored eyes half closed as if trusting the world to behave. A maintenance trolley rests in a siding with the tidy modesty of machines that know their roles. When a train comes, one string of steady domestic lights, it passes along the embankment with the composure of someone leaving a room so others can sleep. The sound is a fabric, heavy enough to cover, light enough not to press. It drapes over the water, over the banks, over the boat, and then it is folded and put away. The river gathers islands for a while, nothing grand, just low crescents of sand with willow combs, like small thoughts that help the larger thought keep its balance. You choose the left-hand passage because the water points that way in small ways. A lick of current here, a darker stripe there. The lantern finds a leaning post with a red cap and then leaves it as it found it. A night bird climbs out of the reeds, lifts a few seconds higher than needed, and returns with exactly the correction it wanted to make. Even errors are quiet when the river is in charge. A quay appears without a crowd. Two cranes stand folded like herons, knees backward, heads tucked. Tire fenders mark the edge in an honest row. Somewhere in the yard, a chain rearranges itself with a single mild clink. Then it holds its peace. You keep midstream and let the quay slip by in the dignified silence workspaces wear after hours. If anyone watches, they do it from behind glass, with the kind of attention that does not require action. Past the quay, the bank steps back and fields resume. A scarecrow attends to a square of dark earth, hat turned a little as if to follow the wind's thinking. A fox pauses at the margin, considers the geometry of fence and ditch, and chooses the solution only a fox would choose. The solution leaves no mark you can be sure of in the morning, but the fox will be sure, and that is one of the night's satisfactions. Cloud wash begins to blur the stars. Not a storm, just a higher cloth moving east. The lantern's reach feels a fraction shorter, which suits the mood of the hour. The motor keeps its low thread, an unobtrusive companion who hums for company and never asks to be praised. Your hands rest in their quiet grammar. Touch, release, touch. And the boat answers with the same words.
When you breathe,
The river receives the breath as if it has been expecting it. A small chapel returns to the conversation on a hillock that concerns itself with floods only as a matter of record. White walls. A roof that makes an honest triangle. A wooden door that will sound like a good note when it opens in the morning. Nearby, a bench waits for someone to tie a shoe or think a thought. The bench does not hurry anyone. Stones at its feet remember many shoes and many thoughts. They have learned not to rank them. Another modern bridge arrives in a modest mood, as if it does not wish to be accused of showing off. Lamps on the rail admit their task with steady little halos. You enter the arch, and the sound squares itself, friendly and close, then expands into the open like a bird let out of a hand. Somewhere beyond, a stray gust organizes the reeds into a single shiver and then forgets what the plan was. The river has no opinion on the plan and continues with its older one. On the right, a harbor opens behind a low mole of stacked stone. Leisure boats sleep with good posture. Lines make neat geometry against cleats. Fenders tick like patient clocks. A small office keeps one lamp burning for the usefulness of being a reference point. In an upstairs window, someone has left a brass object on a sill. A telescope, perhaps, or a vase, and the lamp gives it a narrow column of attention that it seems to appreciate. You pass without borrowing that attention. For a time, the left bank is a single field, bare and properly tended. Wind combs it in long strokes that take minutes to finish, even at night, even with no eyes to admire the work. On the far edge, a hedge holds shape against the dark. A gate interrupts the hedge in a place that is right for gates. The gate does not open, not even a little. You approve of its decision to perform its function exactly as much as necessary and no more. The current tells you, in its way, that a side river is joining. Temperature shifts a half degree, maybe less. A taste of stone changes to a taste of wood for a few boat lengths. The drift lines make a soft X, then decide to be a single line again. You read these things without naming them. Naming would be fine, but not better. The river does not insist on vocabulary. The river favors fluency. At the far edge of the reach, a lone warehouse keeps a serious face over a small landing. The letters on its gable are old enough to have grown dignified. Ivy makes a polite suggestion along the lower brick and then rests. A bicycle leans where bicycles like to lean. The bicycle is asleep. You feel confident it will wake with a good attitude. The banks pinch just enough to give the water an opinion, and the opinion asks for a degree of attention that is more pleasure than work. You offer the attention, and are rewarded with a smoother line than the one you would have made if you tried to be clever. The lantern cuts its circle through air that prefers not to be cut, then mends the cut at once. Behind you, the wake puts stitches in a fabric that was never torn. A bell rings once from somewhere inland. A farm, a small tower, a clock that no longer keeps time for anyone, but refuses to admit it. The sound is round, neither proud nor apologetic. It rolls across the fields, reaches the water, and decides it has arrived. You carry it for a few breaths without meaning to, and then let it go back to its quiet. Ahead, Low fog drifts from a marshy hollow. It is not a caution so much as a polite suggestion. You slow a finger's width, nothing dramatic, and the boat answers by moving from one kind of quiet to another. Birds speak in short syllables in the reeds, and then, deciding the matter has been addressed, stop. The marsh exhales a coolness that suits the hour, and there is the faint sweetness of decaying leaves, the way old books are sweet, if you let them. When the fog thins, the stars are there again, softer for being filtered. The Big Dipper has rotated another imperceptible inch. Orion has altered his posture by a degree you could argue about. The arguments of constellations do not need your input. You enjoy their company without offering advice, and the sky rewards you by being perfectly adequate to the moment. Another town lifts itself from the bank, quiet by design rather than by accident. A low string of quayside lamps, the ferry slip, the suggestion of a square behind the houses where a tree will spread a circle of shade at noon. A statue in the square, some figure on a pedestal you could identify in daylight, now holds exactly the right amount of mystery. The river accepts the town on its terms, which is to say, it flows by and says nothing unkind. You pass the ferry slip without entering the little pocket of stillness inside it. The chain loops over a bollard and greets your lantern with the small sparkle chains like to give.
The ferry itself sleeps under a square tarp that takes and gives the breeze like a beast dreaming small, comfortable dreams. Someone has left a chalkboard menu leaning against a wall. Rainfall has turned the words to pale music. You prefer this version. Beyond the town, a small promontory supports a windbreak of black pines that smell of resin even at night. Between them you glimpse a narrow road learning to climb. The road has replaced stones with gravel in the manner of roads that have already considered the future. A reflector winks once to let you know you are not lost. You are not worried. The river takes you on with the same patience it has shown and will show. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. The boat knows where the middle is. The current knows the height it wants tonight. And the banks will continue their long conversation with the sky whether you watch or rest. When you wake, another bridge will be near. Another island will be deciding whether to be one island or two, and the water will still be making the simplest case for moving forward with kindness. The river opens its hands a little, and you ride in the palm, unhurried. A faint softness hangs in the air ahead, perhaps the kind of high cloud that forgets to be a cloud and chooses to be texture instead. The lantern keeps its small circle. The rest of the night arranges itself around that circle, as if it were a gentle rule. On the left bank, a long meadow runs level with the water for a generous stretch. You see the simple geometry of fence posts and the slow fold of a cart path drifting down to meet a gate. The gate remembers hands. You can tell by the shine on the latch where attention has been paid for years. A low shed holds its roof with patience and lets the river do the talking. You take a breath that tastes of grass and a seam of coolness from soil that never sees the sun, and the breath settles into the rhythm of the hull. Touch, release. Touch, release. A line of poplars shows itself farther on, planted with the tidy intention of people who like straight answers. The trunks carry a powdery pail where the lantern grazes them. The crowns receive a wind that is more idea than force. Leaves turn silver, then dark, then silver again in waves that argue without insisting. Between the trunks, a path keeps pace with you for a while, and then the path elects to be its own story and rises toward farm roofs you do not need to know by name. The current thickens under the bow in that way it has before a bend. You let the boat ease a degree to the right, and the river agrees. A low island appears, more a punctuation than a place, with willows combed by many years of minor floods. You take the channel the water clearly prefers and watch how your light threads the branches. A sheen on a wet twig, a brief letter on a blade, a dark that is not absence, but rest. Somewhere inside the island, a shallow pool holds a memory of last month's rain. The idea of frogs lives there even when the frogs have no work to do tonight.
A distant clink rides the air from ahead, and then another. The pattern resolves into a yard where metal has daily conversations with metal. The yard is mostly asleep now. 2 cranes stand folded, knees backward, heads tucked the way birds do when they mean to ignore you without offense. The quay's concrete face carries the black signatures of many tires, each half-moon softened by years of weather. You keep a respectful center. Your wake climbs and returns in a calmer form, as if the river edits the sentence before it lets it stand. Past the yard, a scatter of houses leans toward the water. Not a town yet, only the beginning of one. Curtains hold their shapes. A balcony inherits the lantern's reflection and returns it as a small, diffused glow on a metal rail. A bicycle sleeps between door and wall, rear reflector winked into life by your passing, and then off again. Nothing asked, nothing promised. You think, this is what it is to move kindly through a night, to leave the least possible footprint and still know where you have been. The sky thins again, and a delicate pane of stars resets the hour. The Big Dipper has turned a patient notch. Orion minds his business behind a gauze of high cloud and lets other constellations practice being important. A single meteor writes a short line and then lets the dark keep the page. Your breath slows, and with it the habit of naming. The names will be there in the morning. The river is enough for now. Ahead, another lock waits with the posture of work that does not need to prove itself. Lamps mark the gates, neither harsh nor weak. You set a polite idle, and the boat makes its syllable against the soft bumper of the waiting face. The keeper's house glows in one window, and then the gate machinery wakes with an old, well-oiled yawn. No numbers, no measuring allowed. Only the sense of being lifted with the care one uses for a sleeping child. Mossy walls give back the lantern in countless small beads. Scratches and initials ride downward on the stone, as if they are the ones doing the moving, and you have been still all along. The upper gates open a hand. You accept the invitation and slide into a higher quiet. The reach beyond is narrower and set between gentle slopes. Vines take the lower terraces in calm handwriting. Above them, dark shoulders keep their shape against the sky. A monastery roofline lifts itself from a hill, a long, patient geometry that has learned how to sit through centuries. The lamps that belong to it are few and good-mannered, the kind that show you where edges are, without trying to tell you what to think. You do not speak its name. Names can make a place smaller when it is busy being large in a quiet way. A ferry slip appears on the right, empty of passengers and schedules. The cable sinks in a smooth diagonal from bank to unseen bank.
sleeping below the water, with the confidence of a tool at rest.
A chalkboard near the ramp holds soft ghosts of numbers and arrows. Rain took the numbers. The wood kept the meaning. Your lantern gives the board a brief life and then turns its attention back to water. Wind from a side valley reaches you, bringing a different night for a moment. A cool breath with a clean edge to it, and the smell of stone that dries in shade. You keep the middle and let that other night pass through your night without argument. In the reeds, a soft collective repositioning happens. Birds and insects and slender stems adjusting their agreements. It takes 3 seconds and leaves no minutes to count. A small port shows itself then. Not grand, just clear about what it does. 2 cranes sit like herons. A low warehouse holds its breath. A stack of pallets receives the lantern and offers a tidy geometry in return. At the far corner, a signal light tips from red to dark to red again, with no urgency, as if reminding itself that tasks are real even when no eyes attend them. You give the place its distance, and it gives you that small gift Riverside workspaces give at night. The dignity of seeing labor asleep. Past the port, the right bank rises into rock faces that hold faint lines of ancient cutting. The marks of people who asked the terrain to be slightly more convenient. The rock has forgiven them and even kept a few of their ideas. Small plans keep address in little ledges where there should be nowhere to live. The lantern shows a bright coin of leaf, then another, and then lets them be as anonymous as they prefer. The path at the base promises a walk that would be honest in daylight. Now, it simply curves and accepts the boat as a fellow traveler. You pass under a rail bridge whose trusses carry a brown the night makes into black. The sound under the bridge gathers to a friendly square and then opens, as if the air had been folded carefully and now smoothed with a hand. A train announces itself with the bare minimum. 2 lamps, then a line of window rectangles, and moves with the courtesy of something that knows you are sleeping, even if you are not. Your chest remembers the tempo, and then forgets it, because forgetting is also a kind of rest. The river narrows briefly where an old spur of stone shoulders into the flow. A green beacon asks you to stand a meter or 2 to starboard. You oblige without calling it a rule. The hull answers with a sentence in the soft grammar you have been speaking since the city fell behind. 1 clause of wake here, a breath there. A hyphen of ripple where the current crosses itself and makes peace at once. The night edits your sentence gently and leaves it better than you found it. On the left, a town keeps a long, low line along the water. A hotel sign glows in letters that choose to be modest. A quay lamp pours a narrow, useful pool. In an upper window, someone reads. You can tell by the way the light hums steadily instead of flickering. Another window holds nothing but a plant that built its own quiet architecture, while nobody minded. The thought that ordinary things work well without being watched pleases a practical corner of your mind and calms the rest. Rain comes in the softest version it knows, a sift more than a fall. It makes a close mic sound on the water, a sound like rice pouring into a jar, like paper being taught how to be quiet.
The lantern's circle shrinks by a thumb's breadth and warms in color. The reflection under the bow turns from silver to the faintest brass. You put your hood up because it is the correct move, not because it matters much. The river likes this rain. The river always did. The shower tidies the air and moves on. Stars report back that they were not harmed. The smell shifts to the good iron of washed stone, to wood that was wood a century ago and is wood tonight, to earth that is pleased without needing to say why. Somewhere along the right bank, a dog lifts its head to name the weather, and then names it enough. The echo makes a round pass through the fields and forgets to return. Beyond a low promontory, the river collects small islands the way a sentence collects commas. You pick the left-hand seam because it is already smooth, and the boat likes being where the water has done the thinking. One spit of sand holds the day's footprints in a way that suggests they enjoyed being made. Laps of wave alter their shapes until the past becomes the right size for a night. A cormorant lifts from a post, unscrolls its wings, and writes a deliberate line along the margin between air and reflection. When it folds the wings again, they keep a little of the water's shine. A key with no one to meet you appears for a breath. Iron rings do the simple work they were made to do in every century. A ladder climbs from black up to shadow, rational as a well-made tool. A single square lantern with a tin cap throws a steady coin of light on wet boards. You do not need to stop. It feels like a place where stopping is understood without being required. The boat carries on, and the quay is already busy being memory. You sense a side river joining from the left. The temperature leaves a trace on the skin over your knuckles. The taste shifts half a shade toward wood and away from stone. A pattern of ripples crosses your bow and settles into a single tone again. Names volunteer themselves, and you decline the invitation. The river is fluent in not needing to know. You let it lead the conversation. A hill rises abruptly on the right and offers a ruin on its crown. A few straight lines of old wall. A suggestion of windows that once did more than suggest. A roof that chooses the stars now instead of tiles. The ruin is not dramatic at night. It holds the sky with a practiced hand and watches quietly, the way a memory watches. You give it the time it asks, without pretending you can measure that time with a clock. Past the hill, the channel widens to a room the river has kept for itself. The wind, weak and well-mannered, explores the surface in long strokes. Your lantern touches nothing for a while, except a low cluster of reeds that accept the attention and then go back to their own idea of the hour. You listen for a sound that never hurries. The motor's low, companionable thread. It carries you as a lullaby carries a thought, and the thought does not mind being carried. A simple crossing appears, 2 ramps, one on each bank, and a boat the size of a useful intention
By day it moves livelihood back and forth. Bicycles and bread, conversations, and the practical cargo of ordinary hours. Tonight, it keeps ties and lets a tarp practice the soft art of being almost still. A chalkboard leans under a porch. Rain made its words into a gray song. The song is fine as it is. The next bridge is modest, a throat of iron with a sober deck. Lamps keep to their work with good discipline, each holding a small, precise oval on the rail. You pass beneath and feel the sound become closer and squarer, then relax into open air at once, as if the river keeps a polite handshake with every span and then steps back to its usual distance. The bridge returns to holding things together. You return to being carried. Fields return, and with them a scent of apple somewhere, or maybe cider, or maybe only the idea of both. A windbreak of poplars cuts the night into clean segments and then stitches them back together with their silver trick. A lane moves toward the bank with the look of a decision that will not be argued. It stops at a post, turns once on itself, and is satisfied. A bell rings, just once. Not a schedule, only metal touching metal in a way that announces nothing. The sound crosses the water and lies down at your feet for a breath. You accept it and let it go. Somewhere beyond your circle, an animal moves through low brush with the innocent determination of a thing going where it meant to go. The motion writes a paragraph you were not invited to read. You understand it anyway. Another village approaches at its own scale. The quay is short. The houses give a little bow. A tree holds a simple shape in the square. In one upstairs window, a person turns a page, and the page shows the kind of light that belongs to thought. In a ground floor window, a shop keeps 2 shelves of jars that glow the way jars glow, when each contains a color that knows its job. The river doesn't slow for any of it, and none of it minds. You keep the middle keeps you. If your eyelids offer to lower, let them make their polite offer into a small, completed action. The boat knows the sentence the water is writing. The water knows the address of the sea and has never lost it. When you wake, the monastery roofline will have moved to the back of the night. The ruin will have taken a softer position against the stars, and the cranes and quays will have returned to being patient outlines. The dark ribbon will still be in front of you, generous and exact, and you will still be somewhere necessary along it, traveling as one travels, when there is no clock left to please. The river chooses a longer line, and you accept the invitation without commentary. A field of pale stubble holds the bank for a while, then steps aside for a run of reeds that whisper to themselves in a language you do not need to learn. The lantern keeps its small circle. Beyond it, the night looks after its own business and seems pleased that you trust it to do so. On the left, the ground rises modestly and carries a narrow road that prefers to be a path. It takes a patient diagonal toward a farmhouse with low eaves and a single window still warm. The window does not blink. Somewhere behind that wall, Someone has ended a page and chosen to keep the lamp for a few more sentences of thought. The lamp agrees. You move on without borrowing the thought. A set of posts with red tops begins to appear at intervals along the right. Simple guardians of a shoal that the river made for itself and will move again when it is ready. The posts wear the night confidently. Your wake shows them their reflection and then removes the proof with gentle efficiency. Farther on, a buoy leans as if listening. Its bell does not speak because there is nothing to correct. A small rain returns, softer than the last, as if the sky has remembered not to raise its voice. It makes a close, even sound on the water and turns your circle of light a warmer shade. You draw the hood forward and let your hands remember where they learned to be quiet. The motor keeps its low thread, and the river keeps the motor company. After a minute, the rain resigns the hour and lets the stars have their work again. You pass a mooring place with tire fenders in a disciplined row and a low wall patched in many small places. Coats of paint have disagreed for years and finally settled on a truce. A short crane folds itself into the posture cranes prefer when they are done announcing themselves. A coil of rope holds the shape of the last hands that used it. You read the shape without pretending to know the story, and then let the story belong to the rope again. Past the quay, the channel narrows between gentle shoulders of land. The current firms in a way your wrists know before your reasoning does. A willow tips its longest branches across the path of your light and collects the shine in thin strokes. Each stroke is a light offered and returned. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar makes a brief sound and gives the silence back improved. A bend reveals a chapel perched on a knoll above the floodline. White walls, a roof of sober pitch, a small cross with enough authority to hold its own outline against the sky. No bell moves. You imagine the note anyway. Round, wooden, held for the right length and then released. The thought is enough. You drift a little longer than you plan, which is to say, the plan learns to like drifting. The hull touches and releases small ripples. The hull forgets those ripples immediately and teaches you to do the same. If there is a law here, it is that forgetting can be a form of kindness. Names slide through, volunteer to help, and leave without leaving marks. Yibs, Melk, Emmersdorf. They arrive like commas in a sentence that already knows how it wants to end. The bank on the left becomes stone for a distance, a terrace wall that has held the earth at a polite angle for longer than anyone now alive can remember. Ivy writes a slow script along the joints and does not hurry, even to please the lantern. Above the wall, a path is chained at one end. The chain is not a threat, only a suggestion. A bench near the path faces the river in the precise place where a breeze would find the back of a neck and keep it honest in summer. Tonight the breeze is an idea. The bench practices waiting. A broad, shallow bar pushes a thin rib of water toward midstream. The bow tells you so in the tone it chooses for a few seconds. You ease a finger's width, and the river says yes. A heron lifts off the edge, long legs trailing like a memory of walking, wings opening with the quiet confidence of a thing that has done this before the idea of bridges was invented. The lantern follows the first few strokes,
and then gives the bird back to the night that built it. Far ahead, a hill shoulders into the river and keeps the channel honest. On a ledge near its base, pale stone shows where quarrying once asked the hill to surrender a small part of itself. The hill complied in a way that does not seem to have injured either party. Vines now hold the lower slopes in neat handwriting. A darker band of wood takes the upper, and a long roofline, perhaps a monastery, keeps a steady, restful geometry above both. The lamps that belong to it are few and polite. They show edges and do not make announcements. The bridge that follows is modest and correct. Its lattice looks black in this light. By day it will choose brown or green, or the particular honesty of unpainted steel. Lamps stand at intervals like sensible opinions. You enter the arch and sound changes shape, becomes a room, keeps you for a breath, then gives you back. Under your stern, the wake draws graceful lines along the piers, edits them, and files them where only the river can find them again. A shallow island divides the flow. You choose the left seam because the water has thought about that already. On the island, willow and reed practice the art of being many small movements that agree to be one. A fox picks its way along the high sand where footprints begin and end within a minute. When it pauses, your lantern makes a brief coin of eye glow and then loses it deliberately so the fox can keep its business private. The village beyond the island keeps a low profile and earns your fondness by doing so. 3 lamps on the quay are enough. One upstairs window, left warm by a late reader, is enough. A signboard that will be legible in daylight is enough.
The church keeps its tower silent and its hands folded.
You hear the bakery before you smell it. Metal turning, something mixing, a small clatter that considers the hour and chooses courtesy. Then the smell arrives. Flour and wood. A memory of crust. You do nothing with the information but breathe it. Past the village, gardens lean down to the water in narrow lots. Fences are low and reasonable. Tools sleep where they were set last. A wheelbarrow holds a small triangle of shadow the lantern does not insist on interrupting. A spigot glints like a star that learned to sit at waist height. Somewhere a radio is left on just loud enough to keep itself company. You recognize no language, because the river has asked you to let languages be for a while. The bank retreats into meadow. Dew has made a finer sheen than rain. Cool, invisible weight on each blade. 1,000 small lenses that will fail to work without the sun, and will not mind failing. A hair moves suddenly, and then remembers to be a ghost again. The sound it makes in the grass is not a sound. It is a sentence you understand without hearing. A long, low sound comes from behind and resolves itself into a barge with the posture of a responsible animal. You give the center more generously than the pilot requires, which is a kind way to travel. The bow wave arranges your wake into fresh grammar and then lets it return to the dialect you brought with you. 2 crew lamps move at the stern like thoughts being compared briefly. The barge draws past at the pace of a long breath and takes its small weather with it. After the barge, the night feels larger in the way rooms feel larger when someone you like has left, and left a good silence. The stars have stitched themselves into more deliberate patterns. The Big Dipper tips a fraction more toward useful. Orion develops a dignity that does not ask for your approval.
The lantern finds the path in front and lets the path find the lantern.
You practice the kind of steering that trains the wrist to agree with water. You come upon a spur of stone that once guided boats into a tiny, sensible harbor. Now the harbor is a curve of quiet. The spur wears grass in its cracks. A solitary bollard holds a halo of rust like a medal earned in honest time. You pass without docking, and the act of not docking becomes as satisfying as docking would have been. Another lock waits farther on, introduced not by signs but by the behavior of the banks and the subtle ambition of the surface. You idle to the waiting pontoon. The whole says its soft syllable. From a low house a lamp wakes. A figure in a coat steps into the fog of its own breath and raises a hand. Levers move. Gates swing with the patience of veterans. The chamber takes you in and lifts you with the same gentleness as before. On the wall, initials and dates rise at the speed of a good story being retold. You read none of them. You understand all of them. When the upper gates part, the river ahead seems newer by a few quiet inches. You move into it as into a fresh page. The motor chooses its comfortable note and keeps it. Reeds along the margin recognize the sound and accept it as a neighbor. The lantern finds nothing urgent and is pleased with that result. A stretch of water accepts a modest crosswind and corrugates itself delicately. The hull corrects by amount enough to be called respect. The correction is a pleasure. You feel the small intelligence of your hands learning to answer without asking your mind to supervise. A post with a green cap nods to the maneuver and keeps its place. A railway returns at a distance and then grows near enough to describe its ideas in the tidy language of lights. A signal changes and changes back without insecurity. A freight slides by, windowless, competent, quiet about its ambitions. The sound arrives as a fabric once more and covers the scene without pressing. Then it is gone, folded, ready for another use elsewhere. A pocket of fog lies ahead where a side stream has cooled the air. You slow a degree. The boat moves from one species of quiet to another. Within the pocket, the world reduces to a few yards of water and the breathing of the motor. Then the pocket loosens and returns both banks to you, as if the night has remembered generosity. You thank it by steering less. The bank on the right puts forward a cluster of sheds with roofs made of practical choices. One roof catches the lantern just enough to draw a pencil line of light along its edge. A ladder leans. A net hangs. A bucket is upside down because rain is a negotiator you can respect. A dog considers a bark and decides to keep the thought. Beyond, the river makes a long, calm statement. You ride the statement, offering nothing but agreement. The stars grow brighter as a thin cloud takes its leave. Far inland, a bell speaks once, and something like an answer follows from farther still. The answers of bells are not debates. They are acknowledgments of good company at a distance. A slope on the left arranges vines and terraces so tidy that even the night recognizes the care. At the foot, a path meets the bank at a right angle, and then, thinking better of that certainty, softens into a curve.
You prefer the curve. The lantern agrees. The next bridge is a simpler thing than the others, a span that takes itself seriously exactly as much as a good tool should. Lamps guide without argument. You pass under with the sensation of being counted by someone who is fair. On the far side, the river opens another room and furnishes it with the usual elements: reeds, a draft of air from somewhere cooler, stars that do their jobs and require no praise. A faint sweetness comes on the wind, orchard again, or cider, or someone's memory of both. The smell makes a small promise about morning.
You nod to the promise and give it no deadline. The night is a place where promises can be kept at the pace that suits them. If your eyes lower, let them. The boat keeps the middle. The current keeps the promise. The banks keep their conversation with the sky. When you wake, a new cluster of lamps will have taken its place along the water. A hill will have moved one step along the horizon, and the river will be explaining, in the same patient voice, how every bend is both familiar and new, and how moving forward can feel exactly like being at rest.
The river makes a courteous S, and then remembers straightness. You settle into the center as if it were a well-worn chair. The wood has learned your weight, and your weight has learned the wood. The lantern keeps its modest circle. The night honors the boundary and does not crowd it. Somewhere a line of geese decides against conversation and lets the hour keep its quiet. On the right, a long levee runs close and plain, a dark handwriting that says, "We have spoken with floods and come to an agreement." Grass tops along its crown make a thin silver brush where the lantern grazes them. The rest becomes the soft, confident dark of land, doing its work off stage. A track follows the foot of the levee for a while. Two pale stripes in the soil, the geometry of chores, and then disappears behind a stand of willow that is voted to be a small wood. The current thickens again, in that way it does before a bend. You let the bow angle one finger to port, and the river says yes, and the motor lowers its tone by a polite fraction, the kind of concession that requires no thanks. A shoal marks itself, not with drama, but with texture. Your wake edits itself into slightly closer lines. A buoy nods once, and reeds along the inside bank write a quick, quiet paragraph in a hand the water understands. Your wrists answer without thinking. This is the kind of knowledge that stays when clocks forget their numbers. A hamlet appears as a set of habits rather than a set of buildings. A lamp at a junction. A bench placed where evening shade would be. A small dock with a rope that has learned the shape of the post it hugs. You pass close enough to read none of it, far enough to believe all of it. The smell of bread that has not yet happened visits without insisting. Someone will wake early, but that someone is absent from this page. The river prefers to talk about those who are asleep. Beyond the hamlet, a shallow bay curls from the outer bank. Broken timbers set in a comb show where an old breakwater tried to negotiate with winter and then agreed to retire. Water, patient as a clerk with a tidy desk, files silt behind the comb and inscribes a new margin with a slow, unshowy pen. A heron uses one of the timbers as if it had been made for that use. The bird lifts, makes two deliberate strokes, and keeps one leg a small secret until it needs it again. A barge comes down with a posture you trust at once. Lights placed correctly. Wake composed, not careless. The kind of progress that looks like purpose and feels like calm. You yield a little more center than courtesy requires, which is another way of being courteous. The barge passes like a patient thought, stern light nodding, rope coils sleeping behind the rails. A pilot who can guess the bend by the smell of the air. Your breath falls into its rise and fall, then remembers its own version and keeps that.
The clouds that tried to be a ceiling give up and become a texture again. Stars repopulate the distance. The Big Dipper has tipped by a small, useful angle. Orion moves with a dignity that belongs to someone who has nothing to prove. A meteor signs once in white chalk and lets the night keep the board. The water takes the sky and returns it slightly edited. An extra ripple here, a faint widening there. The kind of proofreading that improves meaning without changing content. Ahead, a low industrial yard has folded itself into rest. Conveyors are slack, hoppers are quiet. A baler with good posture stands at attention in a corner. A string of lamps holds the fence without complaint. The quay's face shows the usual crescent rub of tires, long moons that have learned to be patient. You keep to midstream, and your wake makes its brief climb and its softer return. The sentence corrected and approved. A chain adjusts itself once in the dark and decides that is enough. A side channel opens on the left, a thin mouth behind a willow bar that would accept a boat willing to be small. Your boat is small enough, but your night is better served by the main flow. You stay with the sentence the river began earlier. In the side water, a fish turns and writes a coin of silver. In the main water, the coin is a rumor that will not need to be verified. A mooring ring, buried in the side bank and now more stone than iron, wears a circlet of rust like a modest medal. The channel narrows for a few minutes as the land remembers hills. Rock steps closer and holds the lantern's gloss in thin licks along old chisel marks. A path at the foot keeps human scale honest, and a short rail remembers hands that found their balance there before language learned to call it balance. Plants that should not have pockets for roots have pockets for roots. They live there as if the rules had always included them. A rail bridge crosses without speeches. Trusses make careful triangles. Lamps count the rhythm a span needs. The deck accepts trains without asking for applause. A local run appears with its modest mask, 2 leading eyes, a dotted line of window squares. Slides along the embankment as if to avoid waking anyone, and moves on. The sound under the bridge becomes a room for a breath and then becomes outside again. Your stern writes a soft thread along the piers and trims it clean. A modest town lifts itself from the right bank with a sequence that feels earned. Quay, lane, square, tower. A statue in the square, which by daylight would insist on a name, now agrees to be a dark vertical that holds the idea of attention without demanding it. A linden keeps a spherical hush under its leaves. Benches at its base remember arguments they did not need to win. A bakery window glows a little earlier than others.
This window qualifies as a promise. Flour will have its conversation with water. Heat will be invited. Hands will do what hands have always done since bread discovered people. You ride the town at a courteous distance, then accept the bank's return to fields. A narrow irrigation feeder stands still and black. A gate with a wheel above it has the dignity of a thing that changes worlds by turning. The wheel is not needed now. The river supplies all the dimension this hour requires. A stand of poplars demonstrates, once more, the silver trick that never grows old when wind is polite. You taste stone again. A lock is near. The banks gather their shoulders. The surface composes itself. Lamps along the gates show edges but refuse to glare. You idle toward the waiting face. Bumpers trade syllables with your hull. The house that minds the mechanism shows its lamp. A figure steps out, coat zipped, light kept low. A nod like a password between old acquaintance. Levers, gears, timbers, water. Each says the word it knows, no more. The chamber's walls, greened with slow lives, breathe you upward at the unremarkable speed of care. Scratches and initials commute downward. Your lantern counts none of them and understands all of them. The upper gates breathe apart. The night ahead is higher by a margin that needs no number. Past the lock, the land relaxes into longer curves. Meadow, then spruce, then an orchard that politely insists on geometry, even at night. A lane approaches the water with intent, and then pauses at a post as if to ask permission. The post neither grants nor refuses. The lane solves itself by turning. You note the small wisdom and keep it for a minute, then spend it by letting your hands do less than they thought they should. A shallow island divides the flow and fails to make a fuss about it. You choose the right seam, not because the sign says so. No sign speaks here. But because the water has already written that choice in faint italics. On the island, low willow makes miniature music with the breeze. A fox prints a sentence that begins and ends in the same breath. A plank half buried in sand holds the story of storms in its grain and the story of calm in the way it lies. The sky performs the smallest negotiation with time. You do not call it dawn, not yet. Still, the far edge of the east learns another shade of dark and tries it on to see how it fits. Stars accept the change with courtesy. The loudest keep their places. The quieter ones practice receding with poise. The river does what rivers do when light experiments. It makes its surface a conference table where decisions are heard and then carried forward without chatter. A cluster of sheds on the left has the neat humility of work done right. Nets hang and give back a dull glint. Floats keep their modest promises. A bucket turned upside down prevents a puddle from claiming it. A dog lifts its head, and then its opinion, and then lowers both in the order that shows experience. The shed doors have received enough paint from enough seasons to be taken seriously. You pass, adding nothing, taking nothing. You come upon a crossing cable, the sort that spends the night asleep beneath the surface, and the day lifting small vehicles between two versions of ordinary. Ramps on either bank turn their faces to one another like old friends who approve of long pauses. A chalkboard leans where rain is converted times and fares into a soft gray melody. You consider reading it, and then accept that the melody is the exact meaning you needed. Another bridge approaches quietly, a plain span with a respectable arch and lamps that draw neat ovals in the mist that still thinks about returning. You pass under. The sound squares itself for a breath. Water edits your wake into something even more polite than it was. The arch watches you leave and resumes being a bridge for whomever is next. The bank gathers into terraces planted so carefully that the night cannot make them messy. You imagine hands that knew where to put each post and when to pull each wire taut. You imagine boots that found the same stones every season and were not annoyed to find them. You imagine a hill learning to carry straight lines with grace. Such imagining at this hour is a way of resting that pretends to be work and fools no one. A bell speaks from inland with a voice that is certain without being loud. One note, then the silence that belongs with it. Another note from farther away answers in a key that does not argue and does not agree. It simply states its case and leaves. The river carries both notes for a minute and files them in the place where it keeps the good noises. A wind from across the plain refreshes the page and leaves a crispness behind. The lantern's circle looks briefly cleaner at the edge. Reeds practice a single shiver and decide that is enough. Your jacket earns its seams. The motor keeps its low thread, and you find, again, that the thread runs through the hour as if the hour were made to be threaded. Perhaps it was. A long, straight training wall projects from the bank and narrows the channel in service of stability. It wears the public scars of use, chips, iron stains, a shoal of small dents, and the private satisfaction of things that have done their job long enough to need no speeches. Your wake climbs it like a child decides to climb a step, as if the world were meant to be gentle if you approached it at a good angle. The wake comes back better behaved, and the river pretends not to take credit. Past the wall, a field shows a solitary tree with a disciplined crown, and a trunk the lantern admires briefly.
The tree stands where it can see floods coming and not be surprised. It stands where cows might shade themselves in hours the river does not keep. A wire fence bows in two easy arcs before and behind the tree, like parentheses that have decided not to close. You pass without finishing the sentence. The channel kinks once and offers you the next port in a modest mood. 2 cranes, a stack of pallets, a small office with a lamp that keeps accounts in a light steady enough to make numbers behave. A caretaker's bicycle leans outside. The chain sags in a way that will be corrected by morning, and does not mind being wrong until then. A gull lifts, edits the air with 2 strokes, and becomes the kind of stillness that moves without being noticed. Your wake knocks politely on the key and is answered with a soft yes. The east has accepted a lean toward paler. You know the shape of that lean. It plays out every time a night decides to let day have a turn. Stars adopt their evening manners in reverse order. The river rehearses being silver where it was pewter, then remembers that rehearsal may be all that is needed. The first bird you hear says almost nothing, and yet
says the right amount. Fields on the left return to their careful terraces. A chapel on a knoll lifts a roofline that behaves. The cross above it accepts a faint outline that was not there a few minutes ago. A path from the chapel to the water threads downhill, chooses the correct contour, and keeps to it. At the margin it stops without fuss. Stones at the path's foot have been sat on by more seasons than there are pages in a ledger. The stones are content with their arithmetic. Another lock announces itself with the gentle pride of a well-kept tool. The gate's lamps hold small halos. The house shows a rectangle of warm promise. The approach speaks in that tonality the river adopts when it will accept being lifted. You idle in, felt against rubber, wood against water, breath against quiet. The figure who keeps the level moves with the authority of a ritual that has learned how to be modest. The walls breathe moss and time. Initials slide. Numbers sink and then rise exactly as much as they should. The upper gates open like a thought that makes room for another thought. You accept the room and proceed. Beyond, the reach broadens enough to let the sky rehearse dawn without consequence. A lane along the right bank receives 3 lamps, each at a proper distance from the next, and each throwing a coin of yellow that is content to be a coin. A bench underneath the 3rd lamp holds rain in its grain from some forgotten hour, and gives it back, slowly, the way benches do when they believe in their work. A sparrow tries a note and decides to keep the rest for later. The motor hums as if it invented the idea, and the river approved the patent. Your hands rest where they know to rest. If your eyelids lower, let them. The middle keeps you, the way good words keep their meaning. When you wake, a proper town will be folding itself into the banks. A bridge will be deciding which color to choose for the day. And the river will still be practicing the simplest skill it knows, carrying you forward with more kindness than is strictly necessary, toward the place where water remembers the sea. The east has been practicing a paler shade for a while, and now the practice begins to matter. The sky does not brighten. It remembers how to become less dark. Stars keep their manners. The louder ones stay, the quieter ones rehearse leaving with grace. The river makes no announcements about any of this. It carries the changes the way it carries everything, without commentary, without hurry, with an accuracy that makes clocks seem theatrical. On the left, a wide meadow holds dew like a memory of rain. In your circle of light, each blade glitters and then returns to being simply grass. A fence line describes a steady sentence toward a stand of poplars where wind, still an idea more than a fact, proposes a minor shiver. The lantern does not insist. It shows enough and trusts the rest to be there. The current thickens slightly, not to argue, but to suggest attention.
You give it the attention and are rewarded with the kind of smooth, correct line the river has been teaching since you left the city behind. A low island divides the flow and fails to make a fuss about it. You choose the seam the water already wrote.
On the sand, a fox prints a short clause that begins and ends within the minute. The clause is perfectly complete. Far ahead, a span gathers itself from the dim edge. Ironwork in neat triangles, lamps set with the calm of tools that like being tools. You approach without speech. Under the arch, sound becomes a room and holds you for 2 breaths, then opens like a hand. Your wake writes a soft thread along the piers and trims it clean. Behind you, the bridge returns to its ordinary excellence, bearing weight nobody thanks it for, not needing the thanks. A run of gardens leans toward the water. Fences are low and reasonable. A rake sleeps where a hand put it down. A hose coils into its own idea of a shell. A small greenhouse holds a pale, domestic glow, like a jar with a captured firefly that has agreed to be comfortable. Somewhere, a kettle begins a conversation with itself. Somewhere, a bird changes sides on a branch. You do not look for either. You let the small noises find you if they need to. The river widens as if remembering something it likes. You keep the middle. The middle keeps you. The motor holds its low thread, a companionable hum that learned your breathing and then invited it to rest. The lantern's circle rides ahead like a coin rolling along a table, steady, predictable, less important than what the coin briefly touches and leaves improved. A modest port rests on the right bank with the dignity night gives to work that sleeps well. 2 cranes stand in their folded heron postures. A row of pallets makes practical geometry. Tire fenders mark the quay with honest crescents.
A red signal eye keeps its small vigil, not to be obeyed tonight, only to remember that morning will require a few formalities. Your wake climbs the concrete face and returns with a gentler opinion. You accept the return and let it go. Mist finds the shallows again. No wall, only a polite veil. The lantern turns it to cream and then loses interest. Reeds write a careful shorthand across the surface and take it back at once. On the far bank, a chapel lifts white walls to the new shade of sky. No bell moves. You imagine the note anyway. Round, wooden, sized to the hour. The notion satisfies the part of you that respects rituals and is content to leave them unperformed. Names drift through. Krems, Melk, Emmersdorf, Grein, Linz. Not to mark progress, only to make a soft music under the hour. You let them. The river has always handled the map more kindly than people do. It drives no flags into bends. It does not correct pronunciation. It prefers fluency over vocabulary.
You are learning the same preference. A shallow bar pushes a thin rib of water toward midstream. The bow tells you before the eye does. You change nothing in a way that changes everything. A whisper of angle, a breath less of throttle, a permission granted to the hull and the current to negotiate in their own language. The result is the kind of ease that looks like good luck to observers and like good manners to the river. Far inland, a bell speaks once and is satisfied with the statement. Another bell, farther and thinner, answers with an argument so polite it cannot be called an argument. The water keeps both notes for a minute and files them where it keeps usable sounds. A dog considers a bark and decides to keep the thought. A rooster half remembers a tradition and postpones it.
The east becomes a cleaner idea. A low quay appears without an audience.
Iron rings wait in their usual patience. A ladder climbs from black to shadow. A square lantern under a tin cap gives a coin of yellow to wet boards. This would be a good place to stop, for reasons that require no names. You pass without stopping, and are rewarded with the satisfaction that comes when the correct choice is to continue. A cable ferry sleeps beneath the surface, its ramps facing one another like old friends who admire long silences. The chalkboard that kept times and fares yesterday now keeps a soft gray melody, where rain translated the words into texture. You prefer the melody. The lantern gives it a brief applause and then turns back to water, which applauds nothing and approves everything done at the proper pace. Past a bend, the banks gather. Stone holds back earth with the confident humility of walls that work for a living. Ivy writes slow cursive along joints. A path at the base keeps honesty between human scale and rock. A bench looks out where a view has been earning itself through several centuries. By daylight, conversation will happen there, with bread and coffee punctuating the grammar. Tonight, the bench practices waiting. Waiting looks good on it. Another lock announces itself, with no need for numbers. The river composes. Lamps draw small halos. Timbers shine like lacquer where water keeps them young. You idle toward the waiting face. The hull says its soft syllable. From the keeper's house, a lamp blooms. A figure steps into the rectangle and moves with the authority of someone who trusts the levers more than the clock. Gates open with the happy old sound of wood talking to iron. Water translates level to level in a voice that never tires of being reasonable. The chamber lifts you by a margin that needs no measurement. Scratches and initials ride downward again, telling their practiced stories to anyone who never asks. You ask nothing. You understand enough. The upper gates part like a thought that makes room for a new thought. The reach beyond holds a fresher quiet, not louder, just a little wider. Poplars perform their silver trick in rows that daylight will call sensible. A lane along the bank says yes to 3 lamps and no to any more. A warehouse keeps its letters, old enough to be dignified. A bicycle leans where bicycles like to lean. The bicycle is asleep and ready to forgive whoever forgot to put it inside. Rain returns as sift, the softest version of itself. It makes a sound like rice into a jar, like a page learning to be still. Your hood finds its work. The lantern's circle warms a shade and shrinks at the edge. The river enjoys the rain in the way old friends enjoy each other's habits. In 5 minutes, the sift ends and leaves a better air behind. Stars report they were not harmed. A barge comes up against the current with the posture of a responsible animal. You give more center than anyone asks you to. 2 crew lamps ghost across rails. A coil of rope keeps the last hands that used it in mind, without bothering anyone. The bow wave combs your wake into a tidier grammar, and then allows it to return to its earlier dialect. The pilot lifts a hand you may or may not see. You answer,
with the same hand, in the same scale. The exchange is complete. You pass under a span that will choose green by day. Tonight, it chooses the honesty of being simply dark. Weed hangs from the upstream faces of the piers like coats on pegs. Under the arch, sound thickens to a square you could almost rest your head against. Then the square becomes outside again. Your stern draws a single ribbon that the river edits into something better, and files where it keeps what is already improved. Fields return on the left, orchard rows on the right. Somewhere, a cidery has loaned the air a sweetness that belongs to noon, but behaves well at this hour. The sweetness does not argue.
It keeps you company for a few breaths and then attends to its own day.
A hare chooses the bank, decides against it, and chooses again with greater conviction. The decision is none of your business and is made beautifully. The east has lost most of its darkness now. Not dawn, only the rehearsal that dawn does until it remembers itself entirely. The Big Dipper tips further toward useful. Orion keeps his dignity while becoming an outline more than a presence. A single long cloud learns the color of pewter where it meets light, and the color of soot where it refuses. Beyond a reach with the calm of a held breath, the river gathers towns into a looser chain. Lamps along the quay declare themselves without enthusiasm. A square behind the houses keeps a tree in custody. A statue's shadow is a correct shape. A shop window keeps two jars that glow because glass always knew how.
You pass at a distance that respects both the water's line and the town's desire not to be awakened before it has its bread.
A training wall cuts a firm angle from the bank. It carries the public scars, chips, iron stains, a shoal of dents, and the private satisfaction of infrastructure with nothing to prove. Your wake climbs and returns improved. You do not congratulate yourself for this. The river prefers not to receive congratulations on anyone's behalf. Another island fails to be dramatic, which is a success. Willow and reed practice being many small movements that agree to be one. A mooring ring half swallowed by sand wears a rust halo, the way a saint in an old painting wears light. You give it the gift of not rescuing it. Rescue would be a mistake here. The ring understands its own work. The lantern finds a post with a green cap. Farther, a post with a red cap. You pass between them with the unremarkable pleasure of obeying a rule that makes sense. When the mist folds in again for 20 heartbeats, you reduce nothing. The boat understands the pocket's size, and the pocket understands the boat's intentions. Then the fold loosens, and both banks return as if the night wants to show it can give back what it borrows. The river offers a long statement where you are expected to add nothing. You add nothing. You let the motor keep its low line, and the current keep its promise, and the banks keep their slow conversation with the sky. This is the grammar the hour respects. Not nouns insisting on being named, but verbs practicing modesty, carrying, softening, folding, letting go. Somewhere inland, a bell speaks again, this time with a note that could be called morning if names were required. Names are not required. The note does the work. A rooster considers the invitation,
A baker finishes the good argument with dough. A child in a high window turns once in a sleep deeper than plans. The river finds all of this perfectly acceptable.
Ahead, the channel meets a place it has arranged for itself. Wider, slower, a room it likes to use when it needs to remind boats how to be patient. You accept the lesson and call it rest. A buoy leans exactly enough to satisfy its purpose without showing off. The wind tastes like stone that dried in shade. Your jacket approves of its seams. The rail approves of your hands. The hour approves of your willingness to do less. If a map were spread in your mind, the line you have drawn would be an almost straight, with courteous bows to the land's preferences. Somewhere behind, bridges count themselves without rivalry. Locks remember the weight of nights. Cranes keep their dreams folded in mechanical joints. Somewhere ahead, more of the same. Islands that prefer to be commas. Quays that prefer to be patient. Towns that prefer to whisper before they speak. The river recognizes itself in every reach and is unsurprised to find its character consistent.
The east finally becomes a color you could name if you cared to. You do not. The lantern pale against that color looks like a promise delivered back to you in smaller coin. You lower it a little, not to finish, only to acknowledge that the sky has taken part of the work. Reeds accept a first, delicate stripe of gold, and behave as if they have seen this before and still regard it as worthwhile. You think of the simple arithmetic of distance, and know it matters less than the arithmetic of calm. You have been traveling by the better math. Breath matched to hull. Hull matched to water. Water matched to a patience older than names. Nothing urgent waits here. If your eyes lower, let them lower fully and do their job. The boat keeps the middle. The current keeps the promise. The banks keep the long conversation with the sky and require no witnesses. When you wake, the river will still be here. Bridges, ports, and quiet cities practicing the serenity of being where they belong. The cranes will have unfolded into day. The chapels will have inherited their bells. The vineyards will have found their green. The ferry will have remembered its cable. We will still be somewhere necessary along the same dark ribbon, which will be less dark by then and just as certain of its destination. The water remembers the sea. It always did. It remembers for both of us.